To medicate or not to medicate?
So in 4-year-olds, I try often not to medicate. I think I've only ever medicated one child that was 4. This kid was actually climbing up the walls. Mom had videos that she showed me. I don't like it because the appetite decreases, there are side effects, but in certain cases, you're gonna need to medicate. Most of the time, kids will do okay, like with play therapists that are trained in play therapy, teach them different techniques to control the attention and stuff like that, or just services in school. Even with a 6-year-old, like, you want to try something else first, unless it's just so bad that they're getting into fights in school. Hello, and welcome to the How Are You Really podcast. Today's episode is Navigating the Maze, Finding the Right Resources for Your Child. I'm your host, Dr. Fariel Mallick. I'm a triple boarded child, adolescent, and adult forensic psychiatrist, and I'm very pleased to welcome my friend, Manahil Khan, who is going to be our guest host for tonight. Manahil had a bunch of questions about resources for her child with ADHD, and we dove into the real life overwhelm of parenting a child with ADHD, from diagnosis to school support, testing, medication, and everything in between. My guest host, Manahil, brings honest questions that so many parents want to ask. And together we unpack how to find the right resources, coordinate providers, and build a village of support when you need it the most. Thank you for joining me. Welcome, Manahil.
Thank you for having me. Glad we have a chance to talk about ADHD.
Yeah, me too.
Let me start off by asking my first question. How can parents find the right resources when they're first concerned about their child having ADHD?
Yeah, so you do take them every 6 months to their pediatrician. So that's like the best place to start. Now, with that being said, your school, the kid's school might also bring up that, hey, the teachers might have concern or something like that. So they'll bring it to your attention. Again, I would say going to the pediatrician first and asking them is like the best place to start because they have scales and questionnaires that they'll have you guys fill out and can point you in the right direction. But also, if you are concern that your pediatrician didn't satisfy you, you can directly reach out to like a child psychologist or child psychiatrist to get them evaluated. I have evaluated a couple of kids that hadn't seen anyone else, with just like a concern from a teacher, to just give parents answers. But I'm curious, I'm so glad that you chose this topic, but what's going on? Like, why were you interested in this topic?
So, personally, I have a child that has been diagnosed with ADHD, and uh, just trying to figure out um, how to support him and where to go. I didn't have any direction in terms of
Mhm.
what to do, in terms of
Mhm.
like, oh, this is what you should do first, second,
Mhm.
third.
Mhm.
Um, this is the order that you should probably do it in, and just uh, getting the appointment into the with the pediatrician sometimes can be a little hectic, and then trying to figure out sort of what your child needs. So I guess that getting that initial diagnosis was very difficult. And especially at such a young age, you're not really certain if it's ADHD or something else,
Yeah, yeah.
because there's a lot of sometimes people will just chalk it up to, well, this is normal for normal behavior for a kid his age or her age. And you're sort of confused, but but there's this nagging feeling inside that, something's off. So I ran with that. I,
That's really good. That's the
I ran
first place
with
to
it.
start.
I ran with it and, um, and pursued it. Uh, but I will say, I did have some direction, and I was very lucky to have a good support system. Personally, my mother is a retired school teacher. She was nudging me to do X, Y, and Z,
Hmm.
steps and all that. And so shout out to my mom
Yeah,
for,
absolutely.
spotting some of the behavior patterns and, you know, and she actually guided me through the school system of what, you're supposed to do to get services from the school and help from the school and etc. I was very lucky to have her in my corner.
How
And
old was he when you first like noticed or had
yeah,
that like feeling?
so I think we started around 4 years old, where we were starting to get take him to doctors and to get him to take those psychological testings and etc. So it was around 4, and we got a psychological testing. We got a diagnosis from there that helped us, uh, and then we finally went to the school system because he was, we were just getting him prepared to get into the school system. And so, and then we found out some of the benefits that we could
Hmm.
get from the school. And then we're fortunate enough that the pediatric office has a clinician that was able to diagnose him
Hmm.
efficiently um, and, start treatment.
Yeah. So, I know when you had messaged me that this was the topic you were interested in, I could like almost feel your frustration through the text. Just what to do, like where
Yeah.
to get resources. Yeah.
I wish there was a checklist, to be quite
Hmm.
honest, right? And a checklist, I guess, is good when your child is officially diagnosed. But, that I wish there was a checklist before the diagnosis.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's such a confusing time, I think, for parents, because you're just trying to rule out something, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's something that's off and you're trying to figure it out. And so, it's only until you figure out what your child is diagnosed with, and then you find a support group. And I wish
Hmm.
there was a support group before.
We see the ADHD in the back. That was very natural. His face didn't show, so it was kind of cute. So,
So how does how do you make sure that your child gets the right services from school or just even from your physician?
yeah, so I think that most pediatricians will know when to refer out to a psychiatrist. It's great that your pediatrician did have someone that could evaluate and diagnose your son, but it's not usually the case. But they do have resources that they can like give you a list. Hey, these are the, psychologists or therapists or psychiatrists in the area that can, evaluate and do the testing, especially in like such a young age. Like 4 is a pretty young age, right? You definitely want a specialist in that case. If they were older, a lot of times pediatricians will start like, ADHD medication. And then, once it's like not being controlled or something, they'll refer out. But for a 4-year-old, I think they know when to refer out. But it's the school systems actually. This is like actually a federal law, and you're right. You can ask the school system to do the psychological evaluation. Now, depending on, again, 4 is such a young age, they haven't even started school yet, so you can't really do that. But if your kid is in school, you should have the school do the psychological testing. And that gives you a guide of, okay, where is their IQ? What is going on, a general idea. There's school psychologists that do it. It's often a great idea to get on that list as soon as possible. So as soon as you have that gut feeling, you want to get on that list because sometimes they do have a wait list. But regardless of that, it is your right. And, it is the law that they have to provide that psychological testing. The benefit of that is that once you do have that diagnosis, whether it's through the school or through a psychologist, outside of the school, you can request services in school. So there are two different programs. One is the 504 and the other one's IEP. This is countrywide. Every single state has it. It's the same thing in every state. So it's not a state to state where things are named differently. But and 504 basically provides some support stuff. So if they need quiet time or they need extra time or something like that. IEP is basically an individualized educational program, so they get way more services on that. So depending on the severity of ADHD, right, one or the other will work. Now I saw this. The first time it was cute that he ran in the background because it was just like, okay, there's the ADHD, you know. But yeah, I don't want to show his face. Okay, so we were talking about
Services in
IEP.
school 504.
Yeah. So IEP is an individualized educational program, and that involves more instruction. So they provide support through teachers or whomever, whatever that particular kid specifically needs. And so for 504, it's not like a huge meeting or something like your psychiatrist or your psychologist where can write like a letter to get you 504 services. They can also request IEP services for you, but IEP has meetings in the school. So in those meetings, you definitely want to take somebody that knows what IEPs are. So therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, in your case, your mom, take it, advocate for your child because you're not being needy or demanding. It's your right. You're advocating for your child. So that the child, he or she can get appropriate services that they need. So those are the school supports that are available and are important to actually get. So it can be as simple as like extra time on tests to actually there being an extra person, extra tutoring, whatever they need.
You mentioned psychological testing. There is, I came across, they call it a testing,
Hmm. Hmm.
neurological and psychological testing. Is there a difference?
So psychological testing, where it's actually called psychoeducational testing, is going to be more specific to IQ and like just kind of geared towards an ADHD diagnosis or what's going on in school towards that system. The neuropsychological testing is more thorough. That's going to not take an hour and a half. That's like an 8 hour evaluation that PhD psychologists can do. Actually, psychiatrists don't do it. They're not trained in it. So it's PhD psychologists that do that testing, and it's like 8 hours. It's more thorough. So they're gonna go through all of it. They're gonna look at autism. They're gonna look at any depression, anxiety, anything else, like overall. And then if you're looking at the psychological or psychoeducational testing, your school psychologist can do that, and it's more specific to just school and different tests that likely in there actually it will also give you if they have a learning disability in just maths, right, or reading or something like that, it will give you in each and every like category how they are comprehending, how they're reading, stuff like that. So that's what psychoeducational or psychological testing is. This neuropsychological is just way more thorough. It's looking at everything.
Okay. So if
Mhm.
you do the latter, you'll get the whole gamut.
You'll get covered. Yeah, you're covered in all of it. So, um, if you look at children versus adults, then adults, you're not going to get psychoeducational testing. You're going to get the full neuropsych evaluation. So, but it's easier, I think, just to get the psychoeducational testing. A lot of the time, the neuropsychological testing might not be covered by insurance, or it's psychologists that are out of network, don't take insurance and stuff like that. So it's like harder or maybe takes more time to get in for that. But it's more thorough, and that's kind of nice because you're covered on every aspect and for a fact, okay, this is what there is. Also, I would say take it with a grain of salt again for neuropsychological testing because they're seeing your child for that one day for 8 hours. What if your child is shy that day or doesn't want to talk, right? That means, or they're just being defiant, right? So they're just completely not gonna do it, and that's just the one day kind of like evaluation. So I think that in that case, if your kid has a therapist or a pediatrician or a psychiatrist, they can give more of a clinical evaluation. And so you want to take both into consideration. Like the neuropsych testing is not God's word. So it's not like the end all be all, right? The clinical evaluation has a lot of value. And that's what psychiatrists mostly will rely on. They do clinical evaluation. And at the end of the day, that is the gold standard. You can get neuropsychological testing done, but that won't necessarily mean that your kid doesn't have ADHD. The clinical evaluation can hold more weight as opposed to the neuropsych testing.
To medicate or not to medicate?
So in 4 year olds, I try often not to medicate. I think I've only ever medicated one child that was 4, but the ADHD was so severe that, you know, how like the little questionnaire when you fill out, it says climbing up the wall. This kid was actually climbing up the walls. Mom had videos that she showed me. So, you know, in that case, they're ready to start school. It was like so bad. Mom was like so worried what's going to happen. In that case, we did have to medicate. And even then, mom wanted to go conservative. So we did non-stimulant first. And then we went to, eventually, I was like, you know what? You're going to have to put your child on stimulant. And I don't like it because the appetite decreases or side effects. But in certain cases, you're going to need to medicate. Most of the time, kids will do okay, like with therapy or there's specific play therapists that are trained in play therapy. I'm educated in play therapy, but I'm not trained in play therapy. So I always like refer out to therapists or psychologists that actually do play therapy, and they can work with the kid to help with the almost like an ADHD coaching, but it's not coaching. It's a 4 year old. You can't coach a 4 year old, but in play, you teach them different techniques that control maybe the
Yes.
attention and stuff like that. So yeah, so there is a route without medication, and that should be tried first, or just services in school. Those can be tried first, especially for a 4 or 5 year old, even with a 6 year old. Like, you know, you want to try something else first, unless it's just so bad that they're getting into fights in school and hitting other kids and just super hyperactive, can't sit at all. So yeah, that's the medicate or not medicate part of it. I think one of the misconceptions is that do the long-term effects of medications, or you know, there's a lot of like information out there. You Google something and so much is gonna get thrown at you, especially Reddit. Reddit is my favorite. Because it's not Dr. Google, it's Dr. Reddit. So everyone's posting something, everyone's having some side effects, and then they're assuming that something's 70% of people get this. Well, 70% of people on Reddit, because they're all complaining about the same thing, not the overall entire population. So just knowing and asking your psychiatrist, oh, so what are the actual side effects that my kid is going to have? What are the long-term side effects? For instance, parents are very concerned with not doing a stimulant. And I had recently had a family that didn't want to do a stimulant and they started on a non-stimulant. I haven't followed up yet, but hopefully it worked. But their whole concern was the side effects. And I was just like, well, I mean, appetite is decreased in both, maybe more so in stimulants, but even the non-stimulants will decrease your appetite. The gold standard treatment is stimulants for ADHD. The long-term research showed that the kids that were long-term on stimulants were 1 inch shorter than the kids that were not on stimulants. So 1 inch, how much does that matter as compared to overall behavior and mood? Because ADHD does cause mood instabilization and stabilization, so they can have mood swings, and that's where all the aggression and defiance comes from.
Yes.
She's like, yeah.
Like I'm very well aware of that. Um, can you do you have tips in terms of how to handle your child when they're in that tantrum or defiance state?
Yeah. So first of all, you don't want to give it attention, positive or negative. A lot of times it's attention thing. So you don't want to punish, you don't want to ground, or that's what usually parents will go to, right? You want to not give it so much attention that they decide, oh, so this gets my parents' attention, so I should do it again. So, that's the first thing. Just ignore, let them be in that moment. Of course, if they're being aggressive, that's a different thing. If they're, getting aggressive with you or getting aggressive with others or with themselves. So that's a different scenario, right? You obviously need to, in that case, tell them to not do it again without punishing or without, it's hard, I know, but not getting angry and yelling, because then again, that's so much attention that they're like, oh, I can do this and get my parents' attention. It's hard. And then having a conversation afterwards, doesn't matter how young they are, even 4-year-old, right? Having a conversation on what happened. How can we avoid this once they're calm, right? What can we do better so you don't react this way? What made you angry? So just having a conversation, like kids will talk to you and tell you. Um, the more, like, it's giving them a little bit of power over what their actions are.
I usually just try to write it out with them,
Hmm.
like let them cry, jump up and down,
Hmm.
you know, make sure they
Hmm.
don't harm others. And and finally, I guess at the end, they tire themselves out.
Yeah, 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 exactly, right? We're talking about like YMCA programs or other programs like that. So for ADHD kids, because they have so much energy, it's great to have them in some sort of sports or some sort of activity where they can do things and just kind of burn that energy. And even for adults, right? Even like, so even looking at from a career standpoint, right? Especially if they have hyperactive leaning, there's no one type or the other. I mean, I'm not so much, okay, it's like, oh, it's hyperactive only or it's inattentive only. There's going to be both. So maybe a little bit more of the other. So looking at careers, something like firefighting, police, ER doctor, something where there's a lot going on and they can multitask and there's a lot of energy that's being used is really good for them. So even from that point onwards, gearing them towards where they can use that energy. And when they're doing that energetic stuff, they're able to better focus and actually don't need medication. That's another thing I had recently. Parents, parents, separated parents completely disagree on whether to give medication or not give medication. The kid is in the sport over the summer. And so I had to really convince the father that, look, how about we give it a trial of 2 weeks? Don't give the medication while they're just doing the sport. And then if before that things get aggressive or they keep on getting in trouble with their coach or whatever, just call me. Well, I'll tell you what to do, right? We'll just continue the medication. Otherwise, it's not a school year. They don't have to sit down in a classroom setting and just focus and not like move around. And so you can skip it. And luckily that worked out great because the call didn't even get all the way to me. They just called and told my office manager that the kid was doing great without ADHD medication because it was sports only.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but I have a few questions. So,
Sure.
where was your biggest frustration when you were going through this process of like getting your son diagnosed and then getting the treatment or getting services set up?
Biggest frustration has come from just how long you have to be on a waiting list to
Hmm.
see a provider.
Yeah.
In my area, there's a shortage of speech therapists and occupational therapists, and getting on the books just to see a psychologist is there too. So there's just a long waiting list, and so that's the big frustration is just the provider shortages in those areas. And I think my second frustration was just simply just not knowing the type of support that I should be providing my child. I just didn't know what I needed to do or how to handle because a lot of it was just like you said, it was just scolding in the beginning, right?
Hmm.
Just understanding why your child's not getting,
Hmm. Hmm.
your direction and you just sort of have to. I learned over time that you just have to act a little bit differently. You have to take a different way, and eventually
Yeah.
you'll get
Yeah.
Um, but that took a while to figure out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of guides and books out there that are good, that actually have good parenting tips for kids with ADHD, for parents of kids with ADHD. And I'm going to say somewhere in May or June, we had a psychologist, a child psychologist, come and talked about ADHD parenting tips. It was really good. Again, you have to make sure that you're not just following whoever or whatever on social media. And you have to make sure what people's credentials are that you're talking to, right? So they know what they're talking about. But there are some really good parenting tips out there, right? Of course, parents don't know, so don't know where to go. And that's an entire system issue, right? Pediatricians should have a list. Hey, here's your book list where you can learn some parenting tips, right? So so those kind of things, right? So yeah, I think that's the whole purpose of this, that we're doing this right now, to get people to know where to turn to, where the education is, not follow random people and have that misinformation needs to be, not that like everyone that is on TikTok, all the influencers don't know what they're talking about, but it's not gonna be just if something worked for your child, you're saying it like it's a fact and that's all that's gonna work, but that's not true. There's other ways and other things that can work, right? So you want to make sure that whatever tips you're getting from a professional.
Yeah, I won't knock the social media platform down. Those like little snippets that you see on TikTok or Instagram just at least puts another idea out there for you to
Mhm.
try it. So it's just sort of nice to just try it. Obviously, they don't replace a professional.
Mhm.
Yeah, but it's nice to
Um,
have those tidbits out there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like we all have short attention spans. Social media has given everyone short attention span, not just people who have ADHD. But yeah, I'm not saying that none of the influencers don't have good tips, but just taking it with a grain of salt that this may or may not work for your child that worked for somebody else.
How do I manage? What's the best way to manage, like the doctors, the therapists, the school? Because there's a lot of providers that, you know, my child is seeing. So what's the best way to manage all of that?
Right. So usually what ends up happening is that you're trying to coordinate all of these people and they're not talking to each other. Primary care, family physician, pediatrician, that's probably the best place that should be coordinating. Your pediatrician may or may not do that, but like most pediatricians will be the ones that are kind of like keeping track of all where you're going. Now, the biggest issue is that there's people that are not in the same, like your my chart or whatever. They might not be in the same system, so they can't access all of the information. In that case, you want to make sure that you're signing release of information with each, therapist, psychiatrist, pediatrician, speech therapist, whomever. You're signing these release of informations for all these people so they can communicate with each other. But definitely advocating for your child with the pediatrician, asking them, hey, can you help coordinate this because I'm getting lost? But at the same time, obviously, one of the things that happens is when I get kids that are a little bit older, parents don't remember what medications were tried or what happened with medication, right? So writing down, we have great technology, right? Having like a Google folder or something where you're writing down all the meds that were tried and what side effects came so that whomever you're seeing, because you might not see the same psychiatrist or pediatrician over time, writing all those down for your information is important so that when you do go to a new psychiatrist, you have all that information. So it is a lot of it falls on the parents, unfortunately, a lot of the times. I know some psychiatrists that will be really good helping with coordination, but really honestly, it's like the primary care, which would be pediatrician in case of children, that should be coordinating with all of different providers and services that you're getting.
I like the tip about having the release of information
Yeah,
because right now it's a little bit piecemeal right now.
yeah.
You know, you're going from just one provider to the other.
Yeah, it's a lot of information to keep up with, right? So the release, just not only helps them talk to each other, but even if they don't have time to talk to each other, at least they can just send
that, that
notes or
is
whatever
good.
over so the other person can see what's going on. Epic is great wherever Epic is used because you can see even if you're going to a different system, you can see it, but not all providers are using it, especially if somebody's outpatient private practice. They're not using Epic. Epic is not built for that kind of practice. And so the care everywhere then goes out the window. It's really nice to have it, but like not always is it gonna work just because everyone's on a different system. But the releases help really a lot.
I think those are my questions overall.
Okay.
Um, um,
If you had a magic wand, what support would appear? Today, not even tomorrow.
if I had a magic wand, I would let there be no provider shortages.
That's very true. So when you were looking for different providers and, speech therapists and psychologists and all of that, were you looking in network with your insurance? Were you even looking out of network? Like what was going on with that?
Obviously, I was just looking for a network, but I know there are people that just do not take insurance.
Mm.
And most of the time, I have providers that are within my network, so that's good. For certain things, however, I found out that there are providers that just simply do not take insurance. And so then the challenge is it worth it to go to this provider? And um, do we have the finances to? And so those are situations that I have that we dealt with. So sometimes those are just really hard. If they're out of network or if they don't take insurance, and then you really want something done, is it
Hmm.
really worth it? So those type of deals. So obviously that just comes out to your preferences and what you.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I definitely want to point out is people, when we're signing up for jobs, and I had no clue either when I signed up for jobs in the past, is that when you're signing up for those benefits, insurance benefits, it lists what your out of network benefits would be. And there's tiers. You get to choose a tier. Looking at a low deductible for your out of network benefits helps a lot, especially for instance, you found out in February that this is going on, right? So for next year, you can just go towards that lower deductible out of network because then your insurance will reimburse after your deductible is met 80% or something like that of whatever the out of network provider is charging. So that's also like it won't be like a direct when you'll pay the provider the full amount, but they can provide you a super bill where you get whatever the insurance tier is to pay you back. So that's something that nobody knows unless I know it now because I'm out of network, so I can teach people that, but nobody tells us that, right?
No,
So
in this world, it's so murky.
yeah, yeah.
It's just like no one can tell you. Uh, your provider can't tell you if your insurance will accept it or not, and the
Hmm.
insurance can't tell you sometimes in advance if
Yeah.
they'll accept it or not.
And in that case, right, out of network benefits, if you look at them and you pay whatever that extra premium is, it's totally worth it because you're going to end up paying actually a lot less when you have something that you need it for, right? And so now I pay attention when I'm signing up for my own insurance. What is the out of network deductible? Even if I'm going in network, but still, you want to have those benefits. One of the things that, like, you had asked me over text was for a checklist, and you brought it up initially. So I do have a checklist.
Awesome, awesome, thank you.
And that is for before getting diagnosed. So exactly where you wanted it to be. I am gonna send you a copy of it, but I'm gonna put it on in the comments. But I can briefly tell you the few steps. One of the
Thank you.
things is, and you want to trust your gut. So if you have a feeling something's off, trust it. Because what's gonna happen is a lot of the times, if it's a boy, like in your case, your son, dad is going to say, I was the same way when I was a kid. Grandparents are going to say, oh, yeah, he was exactly the same way. There's nothing. Well, guess what? Like when 30 years ago, like didn't think to like take your spouse to get them checked, right? So, you want to trust your gut, right? If you feel something's going on, you want to bring it up to your pediatrician. That's step two, right? See your pediatrician, bring up your concerns, talk about it. Keeping a behavior log, just how we talked about like the medication, having that log, or like the names of whoever your kids ended up seeing, having that log. You want to keep a behavior log. So where you're noticing what the behaviors are that are standing out to you and you're like, okay, this doesn't seem normal, or what is going on? How do I help my kid with this? You want to write those down so that you have that log when you go to the pediatrician or any other professional. You can bring that up. The next step is, once you're going to school, requesting that school evaluation, right? You can't get into a psychologist debate as long. School schools are by law required to do the psychoeducational testing if you ask for one and give it to you in writing. It has to be, you have to get that report. That's a law. So you want to get that. Release of information forms so that all the providers can communicate with each other and they're all on the same page, right? You don't
Yeah.
want the therapist to be saying one thing and the psychiatrist to be doing another thing. They all need to be on the same page, right? Knowing what is IEP versus 504, whether you ask your pediatrician that, they know, right? Or your psychiatrist or your child therapist, psychologist, whoever your child is seeing, they know what IEP versus 504s are. So knowing that, because that again is your right, especially in public schools, right? Public school actually are really much better at providing those because there's a check there, right? As opposed to private schools. So, that's important to know so you can advocate for your child. ADHD resources. So there are some really good ADHD coaching programs. Looking into a reputable one where you look for other parents that have utilized these, right? If it's a good program, they're going to start with parents. They're going to talk to you first before they even see the child to understand what is going on, right? And then they'll do the coaching with the child. But a lot of that coaching is with parents. And Noreen Russell, she came and spoke on one of my podcasts. She has a great program, Russell Coaching. It's online, it's all over the country. So, that's a great option. But just like asking where to go for that, because there are also 8 hours certifications that people could do and just have a certificate and call themselves an ADHD coach. You don't want that, obviously. You want somebody that is well trained and knows what they're doing. So joining parent networks, social media, great place, right? There are parents that like will support each other because this is tough. You don't want to go through it alone. You are not alone and you don't want to go through it alone. You want to have like peer support. So you want to have other parents dealing with similar things, having that support. So yes, the Instagram reels and those are great, but then actually having a connection and contact, some Facebook group or something where all of these people are great. You can talk to people that are going through the same thing. Lastly, the most important thing, because you can't take care of others if you're not taking care of yourself, so take care of yourself. Make sure that you're making time for yourself because, especially the younger they are, the more hyperactive the ADHD is, and that can be exhausting. So make sure you're taking time to take care of yourself too and not burning out. But I am gonna have this checklist in a PDF or some kind of form that I will send to you and upload with the episode so everyone has access to it. Now that I've said that, take care of yourself, I have the most important question. How are you really doing?
I'm doing great.
That is fantastic. So the overwhelmingness, the navigating everything, how has that been?
That's been really good. I'm at a good place. I feel like everything's coming together.
That's amazing. I really appreciate us talking about this because it's so important and so many people are struggling. I see this on Facebook all the time. Like, I'm part of local groups, community groups, and often there will be a mom like, what do I do with my kid? Where do I start? What do I do? Where do I go? Where do I take my child? Start wherever you can. If the pediatrician doesn't satisfy you, go to a child therapist or psychiatrist or whomever, or
Yes.
bug the school.
Thank you for this wealth of information. No, it's it's really helpful to talk about it. And yeah, I just wanted to uh, bring it out there.
Thank you so much for coming on and spending this time with me and asking all these great questions.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Before we close, I always ask, how are you really doing? Thank you so much for spending this time with us on How Are You Really? If something in this episode spoke to you, send it to a friend, leave a review, or follow the show. It really helps. Until next time.